My name is Corky. I'm with the Yolo Basin Foundation, and welcome to Flyway Nights tonight. I am going to share with you our screen here for what we are doing. So Flyway Nights is our speaker series going from November through April, and tonight we're really pleased to have Cliff Feldheim with us. He's going to be sharing with us about the conservation efforts of CalTrout and working both with fish and with birds, which is quite exciting. I also want to put in a plug for next month. Next month's speaker group is going to be the fellowship recipients. Yolo Basin Foundation has a program to help sponsor students, and this next month, we're going to be hearing from last year's fellows to see how they're coming along on their projects. One of which will be about salmon on Pieta Creek. One is a radar study about the bats and their movements and counting. And then the third will be about a study in the bypass having to do with the turtles and the snakes. So tonight we're going to be doing fins and feathers, and next month we're going to be doing fish, bats, turtles, and snakes. All right, Cliff, go ahead and take it away.
Well, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my work and CalTrout's work with you. Again, I'm Cliff Feldheim. I'm a senior project manager with California Trout. Work here in the Central Valley region. A little bit about my job. Along with being a program manager running all the contracts and budgets for our region, I'm also a biologist, do a lot of biology and science for the region. I've developed partnerships and really try to diversify and expand our work. And I'll get into some of that. And for those that aren't familiar with California Trout, we were founded in 1971 with the mission of ensuring healthy waters and resilient wild fish for a better California. We've got 47 staff in 6 different regions throughout the state. This graphic shows our different regions. Our central office is in San Francisco, and we're really, despite I'll say trout being in our name, we certainly do a lot with trout in the Sierras, northeastern California, but we're really salmon focused along the coast, the Central Valley, dealing with a lot of issues to protect habitat, restore habitat, fish passage issues, and a lot of research. And I've listed here our 5 key initiatives. And really, I think one of the things that makes CalTrout unique is really our projects are driven by research and science, and really trying to push the envelope, doing innovative science, we work very closely with UC Davis, and really try to have that be the foundation of our work and all our initiatives moving forward. And as part of my role with CalTrout, in February of this year, we were invited to be a partner on the Central Valley Joint Venture, which is a migratory bird partnership, about 21 different agencies, nonprofits, working to conserve bird habitat in the Central Valley. And CalTrout's edition, I sit on the management board for the Central Valley Joint Venture, represents the first time there's about 22 joint ventures across North America. And this is the first time that a fish organization has joined a migratory bird partnership and conservation group. So we're really excited to see how we can bring these 2 disciplines together and really work to conserve these systems. And I'll dive into a couple different ways that we're working to conserve bird habitat in our work. And the first couple examples here are kind of the obvious ones. Some of the easy things we can do is look at our restoration enhancement projects and see how we can incorporate bird benefits, and then incorporating birds into our research and management. And some examples of the first couple categories, just simple things. This is a project along the Sacramento River. Um, looking to, you can see the construction in the picture in the top left, constructing some off-channel habitat for salmon, get them out of the flow, get them some water with longer residence time so they could feed, really diversify the habitat along the rivers. And with that, then you can see the banks are, we've removed all the vegetation and sometimes created new slopes. And then, working to replant those with a diversity of trees and shrubs, native grasses that provide habitat for a diversity of birds, and incorporating those, and then developing the monitoring programs around that to see how birds respond to that and improve as we go. While we're doing that along our rivers, along the coast as well. This is a picture of Redwood Creek estuary, and you can see the pointed ends of this channel here for the estuary, very controlled to stop flooding, to direct the flows back out to the ocean. And we're looking to do something more like this, open that up, expand the habitat, work with groups. We're working with Pacific Birds joint venture to incorporate, like this picture, you've got some different bars, loafing bars, elevation changes. So you've got shallow riffles as well as deeper water habitat. And when the area floods, creating adversity habitat for a diversity of coastal birds. So really just working within other regional plans and incorporating, like I say, that diversity into these habitats and considering birds when we're doing these management and restoration enhancement projects. So I really want to focus on our work in the Central Valley. And before I dive into it, I want to kind of set the stage for what California's Central Valley looked like historically. And if we go back, 100 years in the Central Valley, our rivers flooded their banks seasonally, probably 3-4 times a year. They flooded their banks and created those floodplains, seasonal wetlands in deeper areas, in wetter winters, created tule marshes, wide expanses of wetlands, a very dynamic wetland environment, and I'd say a lot more, shall we say, residence time for our water and our wetlands throughout the valley. And then with farming and urban development, the goal really became to contain the flooding and get the water out to the ocean as quickly as possible. Recontour rivers, have channels, get that water out quickly, and eventually then expand that to get water to other parts of California. But really to, if you will, divorce the water from the adjacent habitats and just get it downstream. And what we lost, a big part of that were these floodplains that spread the water across the landscape. And that spreading across the landscape, that residence time, flooded a lot of upland habitats, grasslands, riparian corridors, and then converted those plants, that energy, into aquatic invertebrates, and very rich in production. And our fish followed that out. Our birds used that. Very dynamic habitats that our native fish and wildlife were able to take advantage of. Today we have a much different environment, but in the Sacramento Valley, we're very lucky to have, in any given year, the last, well, I'll say 20 years, we've averaged between 200,000 to 500,000 acres of winter flooded rice. So a wetland environment, if you will, winter rice is harvested in the summertime. Stubble then is flooded in the fall, water's held through the winter, and then drained, say February, to dry out to grow rice again. And that 200,000 to 500,000 acres, in many ways, is a surrogate wetland. Really, has provided a lot of habitat for birds. That's been well documented, and much of that is over these historic floodplains. And similarly, in the Central Valley, we currently have about 250,000 acres of managed wetlands. So these are our national wildlife refuges, our state wildlife areas, and the hundreds of duck hunting clubs throughout the valley. These wetlands are typically flooded, similar to our winter flooded rice. So typically flooded in October, water held through, early February, maybe March, most of them, and then dried out during the summertime. So again, many of these wetlands then are on that historic floodplain. So these habitats we have now in the Central Valley are what I'd call novel ecosystems. They're not the same habitats that our native fish and wildlife evolved with, but through habitat enhancement and management, we can really provide many of the biophysical conditions that these fish and wildlife populations need to thrive and to be abundant. And what we've dived into is creating that floodplain, that working to really, try to connect those floodplains back to the rivers. And while we would love the opportunity to pull a levee back and have flooding on a big extent, it's not practical throughout the vast majority of the valley. And so we started, about 15 years ago with this idea of trying to create floodplains and flooded rice. So taking our winter flooded rice, in the fall, it would look like that top right picture. That's the rice stubble that's left after harvest. Diverting water to flood that, holding that water, essentially growing a bunch of aquatic invertebrates, and then diverting it back into the river. And we can't get the fish onto the floodplain, but we can create those foods on that floodplain and bring it back to the fish. So what we've done now, the last 5 years, really focused in on flooding these fallow rice fields, flooding it to less than 12 inches of water. We found the residence time, we need to hold that water for about 3 weeks, and we create a diverse population of aquatic invertebrates, and then drain that invertebrate-rich water back into the Sacramento River at a time when fish are present. So yeah, like I said, we started that in 2015, really a pilot study, and we've now expanded from 1,500 acres to last year we had 30,000 acres. And with that, to evaluate these projects, we put cages out. You can see a cage there on the top picture, and put salmon in there near both at the location of where the derived foods come into the river, and then upstream and then downstream, and we can see how they grow, how they put on weight. And at the same time, then we're sampling all the aquatic invertebrates so we know what's coming into the river. We've also then expanded recently to working with duck hunting clubs to provide that same floodplain-derived foods for fish. Last year, we had 5,000 acres of managed wetlands in the program. And again, these are very similar to our winter flooded rice in that they're dry during the summertime to, in this case, to grow a suite of plants that produce seeds for wintering waterfowl. Wintering waterfowl eat the seeds. And so you're doing much of the same thing. You're flooding upland habitat and growing a bunch of aquatic invertebrates. So how that worked? This is some pictures from our recent work. You can see we've got fish in the canal, fish fed with the floodplain derivative, and then fish in the river, upstream and downstream of that location. And as this picture shows, these fish were the same size 3 weeks, starting at 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, you can see how much bigger and fatter these floodplain-derived fish are. And one of the interesting things, we put cages down as far as 5 miles downstream from these input sources, and still saw this this increased growth. So very, very effective, at least for cage fish, to get them to grow bigger and fatter than fish that aren't getting these floodplain derivatives. And working with UC Davis, we wanted to do one more look at these fish and say, in this case, this study was for winter run salmon. How many of these fish that are getting these floodplain derived foods return to spawn? What is their return rate compared to fish that aren't getting those? And interestingly, with salmon, with many fish, their fish eyes, their lenses grow in layers, almost like a layer in an onion. And you can peel those layers back, and they represent different periods in the fish's life. And by looking at those, you can tell through derivatives, basically, what the fish were eating. And the results of that work were startling. In 2019, 80% of the returning fish had access to these floodplain derived foods. And in 2020, 86% of the returning fish had access to these floodplain derived foods. So it's giving us, what we'd hope for, if you will. Not only are these fish bigger, fatter fish, but they're returning at a higher rate too. So one of the things we're looking to do now is say, how do we apply this across the landscape to have a landscape level impact on the return rates of salmon and help recover those populations? And when we really dive into it, it's really this food on the floodplain. And this picture captures it really well. These are our flooded rice fields or flooded managed wetlands there on the left. And you can see how dense those aquatic invertebrate population is compared to, say, the adjacent canal or the Sacramento River. There's just a whole lot more food. And that food benefits fish and it feeds the birds. So now we're looking at, as we've demonstrated this works for fish, really, how do we develop management strategies that promote both birds and fish in these rice and managed wetlands? And to set that stage, with the target being fish first, the Central Valley, unlike anywhere else in the world, has 4 distinct runs of salmon: fall run, late fall run, winter, and spring. And so that really gives us an opportunity to provide food through all but the summer and hit these populations, these fish that are out migrating. So young of the year, basically, that are going out to the ocean, get them bigger, stronger, fatter fish so that they can return and spawn. So our first focus, being in the Sacramento Valley, working in the Central Valley, is with waterfowl. The Central Valley is one of the most important wintering waterfowl areas in North America and has some of the highest densities of waterfowl anywhere in the world. So the low-hanging fruit, if you will, is, can these practices benefit waterfowl? And can we apply them across landscapes that are managed for waterfowl? And to get at that, the last couple of years, we've been doing bird surveys on these comparing traditionally winded flooded rice fields to rice fields managed for these floodplain derived foods. So again, comparing a winter flooded rice field that is well documented to benefit shorebirds and waterfowl, suite of birds. These were flooded consistently from, say, October to February, to comparing that to our fish food production fields that are flooded perhaps that same duration, but for 3 weeks at a time, drawn down, then reflooded, drawn down maybe 2 or 3 times to produce food for fish at varying times throughout the fall through early spring. And looking at how both those species diversity and abundance compare and what the benefits of each one are. And one of the interesting findings to date, I should say, we're working, I conduct some of the surveys as well as Audubon Nature Conservancy in Point Blue, and we're gearing up for surveys this year as well. And one of the interesting findings so far is that we've had similar duck use comparing these two fields, but a less Arctic nesting goose use. That's our white-fronted geese, Ross's geese, and lesser snow geese. And one of the reasons that's interesting for me is that if you spent any time in the Sacramento Valley over the last 10 years, you've probably seen this white-fronted goose. If we look at our winter counts, this is October counts of white-fronted geese in the Sacramento Valley, you can see how much they've increased dramatically. Really from about 300,000 in 94, 95 to 650,000 in 2015. Our most recent counts are up around 800,000. So increasing dramatically over the last, say 20 years. And similarly, even a more dramatic increase in our snow geese and Ross's goose populations. The blue line on the right, top right there, is our wintering population. You can see how dramatically that's increased from something like 800,000 in 2008. We're up over 1.8 million this last year. So almost an exponential increase in those populations. And the bottom graph shows those breeding populations increasing as well. So our Arctic nesting geese populations are expanding dramatically. And why is that, you might ask? This graphic shows the top circles there are these breeding locations for these different populations. Just to put that framework, they are in the Arctic, the more northern areas of Alaska, Canada, even mainland Russia and Siberia. And those birds are, if you will, one of the winners from climate change. As the Arctic has slowly warmed, it's opened up more and more areas for these birds to nest, more and more green forage for them to feed on. And interestingly, in talking to some of the biologists up there, a lot of these populations are colony nesting birds. So hundreds of nests, dozens of nests in an area. And historically, you might have had a polar bear walk through that colony and just by happenstance destroy a quarter of the nest just by trampling them. And those polar bears aren't in that region anymore. They've been pushed to other areas. So these birds continue to expand and will likely continue to expand. And as they do, we're more and more concerned what those impacts will be to our winter dabbling ducks. If you've spent some time in the Sacramento Valley, you've seen, like this picture, clouds of white geese. Our white fronts are very similar, and you get 20,000 geese in a 500-acre rice field, and all the food is gone in 2 or 3 nights. And many times these birds are showing up earlier in the fall, before most of our ducks are showing up. Our northern nesting ducks are showing up in December and January. So we're really, really concerned what those impacts of dabbling ducks will be over time. And I'd say one of the fascinating results right now is that the ducks are feeding in there, the ducks are using it, but the Arctic nesting geese don't seem to be using that habitat. So perhaps it's a part of a tool to solve these impacts. And one of the things that's interesting with the Central Valley is that not only is it very important wintering habitat, it's very important breeding habitat for ducks as well. This graphic shows this is band returns for these 4 species. So these 4 species were banded in the Sacramento Valley or Suisun Marsh, and banded with a band on their leg that has a number on it with a 1-800 number, or before that, or now a website. So a hunter, largely hunters that shoot those birds, can report it, and then they get a certificate of where that bird was banded and an approximation of how old it is. And you can see for these 4 species, they're recovered really all over North America. So our breeding birds, our breeding ducks, are distributing across North America. And then locally, some work I published 4 or 5 years ago, again looking at hunter-returned birds, banded birds, over the last, well, since 1961, we asked the question, where were the birds harvested in California by hunters? Where did they breed? And one of the things that came out was 55 to 85% of the mallards shot in California are born in California. And similarly, mallard, cinnamon teal, and gadwall. So what that means for waterfowl managers in the Central Valley is that 60 to 80% of the mallards, cinnamon teal, and gadwall that winter in California also breed in California. So if we need to provide both of those habitats for these species. And excuse me, if you've seen any of the local breeding duck population data, and well, we don't do the midwinter survey the same way anymore the last few years, but we still have some winter data. You can see the breeding graph there is in the top right. That's for mallards. Population has decreased dramatically, so much so that 2021 was the lowest breeding count on record. So these birds are continuing to decline, and you could argue the last few years it's due to drought, but that trend, really since the late 90s. And then, as you'd expect, given that our breeding population represents our wintering population shows the same trend. Since about the late 90s, the population has decreased dramatically. And interestingly, one of the studies was done actually in the San Joaquin Valley, looking at breeding mallards, used what we call reverse cycle brood ponds. So they're the opposite flooding cycle of our managed wetlands in the wintertime. So these are ponds that would be much like a floodplain in the spring or summer, where these are habitats that are dry all winter, and then water's applied to the pond, say mid-February, and then water's held on the pond until, July or August. And much like we're finding in our floodplain-derived foods for fish, it's growing a ton of aquatic invertebrates, and these ducklings are foraging in those habitats, and their survival goes way up. So much so that it's 2 to 3-fold the brood survival of other breeding habitats. So we have the opportunity then to create habitat for ducklings, increase duckling survival, while at the same time diverting some of that for out migrating fish. And we'll be doing some of that this year for the first time. Another aspect we'll be doing, our breeding ducks, after they get done nesting and raising their young, they go through a wing molt, and they molt lose the feathers of their wings, and there's actually a period, maybe 7 to 14 days where they're flightless. And we've long suspected that these birds migrate somewhere to take advantage of a habitat that would keep them away from predators. So big open water habitats where they can sit in the open water and be away from mammalian predators. And a study we published this year, we actually put transmitters on gadwall and mallards. And you can see a transmitter on this hen mallard in this picture. It's a backpack attachment. You can see sort of a reflective surface on the top. That's actually a solar panel that charges the battery. And it works much like a cell phone, off a cell phone network, and provides a GPS coordinate, a minimum of every day, as frequently as every half hour, 15 minutes to a half hour. And we can track these birds anywhere. If the radio stays attached, they stay alive for 2 to 3 years. So tremendous amount of information. And for the first time, we could really assess where these birds were going and what they were using for these molting habitats. And as we suspected, the majority of birds, 75 to 90%, went to the Klamath Basin. So northeastern California, southeastern Oregon. And if you're familiar at all what's going on in that region the last few years, they don't have any water. And it's a combination of drought, and it's a combination of diverting water for endangered species and for farming. And this year, of the approximately 350,000 acres of wetlands in the Klamath Basin, 90% of them are dry. And so we're faced with a challenge with our breeding ducks. What can we provide them so they can molt successfully? And our paper was able to document that given the right habitat in the valley, a number of birds will stay in the Suisun Marsh in the Sacramento Valley. And so creating these either permanent wetlands that are flooded year-round or semi-permanent wetlands that are flooded, 6 to 9 months out of the year. And that provides a little bit deeper water for them, and they're able to molt successfully. And we're looking this year now of how we can combine those flood up and drawdown cycles with producing food for fish and helping to offset those costs. So a lot of what we're doing right now is taking these ideas with waterfowl, with managed wetlands, and working with a number of programs. So the State Fish and Wildlife has 2 big programs, the Waterfowl Habitat Program, the Presley Program, which helps offset the cost of private landowners for managing, for breeding and wintering waterfowl. They also have a new program, the Rice Habitat Incentive Program, again, looking to provide habitat for wintering waterfowl and shorebirds, and working with those other partnerships, and most recently, drought relief programs. So, our politicians are really good at trying to solve problems by throwing money at it. So, it's drought. Well, here's, hundreds of thousands of dollars, go find water, go do something good to offset that. So we've been trying to work with our partners then to take that, combine it with money for fish, and get the most out of it, get the most habitat acres, get the most benefit, waterfowl and fish, and really reduce the cost for private landowners and show system-wide benefits. So really to get to that landscape level change for our bird and fish populations. So moving then into this next year, then what we're really looking to do is continue to work with rice and duck clubs in the Sacramento Valley. We'll be working extensively in the Suisun Marsh. And the Suisun Marsh, if you're not familiar with the marsh, it's between the delta and the bay, and it's about 120,000 acres of managed wetlands and bays and sloughs. And with that, about 150 duck hunting clubs, as well as large state wildlife areas, Grizzly Island wildlife area. So working with private landowners there to provide food for out-migrating salmon and other native fish at times when they're present in the bays and sloughs. And then also going to kick off some work with Staten Island. Staten Island, if you haven't been out there, arguably the single most important habitat in the Pacific Flyway for wintering sandhill cranes. And sandhill crane management dovetails very nicely with this fish food production work. They roost in shallow wetlands. The wetlands tend to be flooded for 3 to 4 weeks and then rotated across an area. So they're growing aquatic invertebrates. They also have rice and corn out there that can be flooded for the same things. And then the Mokwalami River is just to the north of the island. So we're going to be working with the Nature Conservancy and Staten Island staff to see how we can bring those two together to promote sandhill crane habitat and fish food production. And then in the San Joaquin Valley, we're going to be working with China Island State Wildlife Area, to look how we can, along the San Joaquin River, there's some opportunity to provide floodplain habitats, basically areas that when the river's up a little bit, high a little bit, it'll flood upland areas, create shallow water habitat, holding that water again for 3 to 4 weeks, producing a bunch of aquatic invertebrates that fish can eat, providing bird habitat, and then through our improvements, will improve the water supply and dependability for the state wildlife area out there. So trying to bring those two disciplines together. So a few examples of how we're expanding our work and where we're looking to go with it. And that's all I have. Really an overview of where we're going and what we're doing, and happy to answer any questions about the bird work or the fish work.
Thank you, Cliff. Gosh, so much work going on there. Marilyn has our first question, and it's what's going on with your program at Cosumnes River Preserve?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, it's a place we look to expand to. Some of the early floodplain work at UC Davis, my boss Jacob Katz and others were done out there, really documenting as the river flooded on those floodplains, created that habitat. Salmon actually left the banks of the river, went into the floodplains. They sampled the aquatic invertebrates. And the populations were higher than anything they'd have ever found. And so one of the things we're hoping to get to is just that, creating a good bird habitat out there and identifying areas where we can maximize that floodplain habitat in those flooded uplands, oak woodlands, that great floodplain habitat they have. So it's on our list to get there, and we've had those initial conversations, and like I say, that the research has actually been published on that area, so serves as a great foundation.
Super. Yeah, a couple of comments come in with appreciation, and then here's the next question. This one's from Ken. Says, graphic rice and cranes. Are rice fields preferred or acceptable habitat for cranes? On North Stanton Island Road, it seems to be corn.
That's a good question. They certainly will use the rice, and TNC on Staten is going to be, they're actually flooding some rice fields that they haven't had before this year, and be doing a lot more surveys to see how cranes are using the fields out there, how they can maximize their placement next to corn and next to roosts. Really looking to diversify out there. But in the Sacramento Valley, we see them in rice, say north of the Gray Lodge area. They forage very heavily in the rice there.
We keep asking them to come to YOLO, but we only get a few here and there.
Yeah, they sure fly over a lot though, huh?
They do. They fly over and we talk to them, and we just can't get them to come down. All right. Oh. Yep, Ken's same comment. Not having them so much here on the ground here at YOLO.
Yeah.
Do you have projects that you do with the YOLO Bypass Wildlife Area?
Yeah, that just made me think of it. Actually, I've been having conversations with Joe Hobbs. We've met a couple times, toured the wildlife area to identify some areas where we can do some fish food production, get water both out to the tow drain and to the shipping channel. The shipping channel, while an artificial habitat, I'll get back to it, a novel ecosystem, provides great habitat for salmon as well as Delta smelt. And it connects up to the Sacramento River, not too many miles downstream, so that food can get exported. Again, if you look at our work, we've been able to find fish growing bigger 5 miles downstream from it. So there's the opportunity. And Joe's very interested in doing that work with us and diversifying things. And I've talked to him about providing brood habitat doing it that time of year, as well as molting habitat. So yeah, we're looking forward to doing that, working with Joe.
We have a request here for the CalTrout website.
Yes, we do have a website. It's, what is it, www.caltrout.org. And we have a very active, shall I say, communications department. We're sending a lot of newsletter updates. If you're on social media, Instagram.
All right. Well, thank you, Cliff. Thanks for joining us tonight and sharing all the amazing projects. Oh, wait, got another one. May have missed it, but the water situation in Klamath Basin contributed to production or migratory food and rest. It seems lower numbers on our tour route.
Yeah, the Klamath Basin is both of those things. It's one of the most important areas for breeding waterfowl for California, for mallards and gadwall and cinnamon teal. And it's also the single most important migratory stopover for waterfowl. And we actually have transmitters on some geese right now. It's very similar transmitters to what I showed on those breeding ducks. And we've seen geese just not even stop there now and just go. And interestingly, on the tour routes, if you're talking about, say, like Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, it's really fascinating right now. We've got, again, transmitters from a study I initiated, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, and USGS is taken over. They've got transmitters on 14 different species of waterfowl, and we're able to see how actually Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, with the rice adjacent to it not flooding, it's just not providing habitat. It's just not being used. Those birds are going to places like Gray Lodge, where there's water and rice right next to it. And it's actually, some of that work is going to guide some of our waterfowl and wetland management and conservation probably for the next 20 years.
So we're seeing more and more come in.
As much as I don't like this drought is an awesome opportunity for us as waterfowl biologists to understand how these birds are using the landscape, the importance of our refuges and rice, and then make those adjustments in the face of our changing climates and increasing cycles of dry years. This information is really going to help us figure out how to manage these populations.
It's going to be a tough haul for them.
Yeah.
Several years ago, Yolo Audubon had a field trip to a rice farm in the Causeway to a demonstration farm, which was try to provide refuge for salmon fries washed into the Delta. I believe, I think you're talking about the Nags Ranch project, maybe? Let's see, washed into the Delta, which could be preyed upon by shorebirds. Are these projects that are designed to protect small salmon from predation by the shorebirds?
We're getting there. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. One of our problems, if you will, with creating habitat for these fish is, since they're threatened or endangered species, there's a lot of take issues around that. And so right now we've been trying to keep the fish out, and then we're trying to convince, if you will, the hatcheries to give us some fish, put them out in these areas, and demonstrate that we can provide these off-channel habitats for them that can be enough cover to keep them from birds. So we're hopefully getting there, and that's part of the long-term solutions is providing those habitats. Especially a place like the San Joaquin River, where most of those fish are hatchery fish to begin with. We can put these hatchery fish in places where, they don't have to be fed by staff. They can be fed by these natural floodplains, by these managed habitats. and really increase their survival.
And probably do end up being food along the way here and there for some of our up the food chain.
And that's okay. I mean, that's why, salmon lay hundreds of thousands of eggs, they're the base of the food chain, We just have to have enough survive to return and have a good return rate.
Thank you so much for your work, Cliff.
Yeah, thank you. No, again, thank you for the opportunity to share. And I look forward to, as we expand, sharing more and showing more of our bird information.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, hopefully some people will follow you along too. And before I lose everybody, I do want to remind you about next month again. Because we're pretty excited to see what some of our students from last year were doing. We're actually in the last year of the fellowship program at this point anyway. And so we'll have this year's, and then next year we'll hear from another group, and then likely that will be the end of the fellowship piece. So really excited to hear again about salmon. Seems to be a fish talk time. Of course, personally, I'm interested to see what's coming of the radar with the bats, and then the turtles and snakes, which will be quite interesting too. So hopefully you'll join us next month when we're having our talk. That information is up on our website, yolobasin.org. And thanks for coming this evening. I'll be posting the recording here probably in a few days and share it back out with everybody so you can spread the word about the work of CalTrout and what's going on with the fish and the feathers. Thank you, Cliff.
Yeah,
have a great night, everybody.
Yeah, great night. Bye.
Bye-bye now.